Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into 2 on OSU Big 12 Championship Game edition for the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Not what I don't think anybody would have thought back in week 4, back in week 3. Certainly not what I thought. But Sam, here we are. Here the Cowboys are. We're going to get into the game against Texas, how in the world the Cowboys got here. But first, we're going to thank some of our sponsors who do such a good job supporting what we do here at Sellout Crowd and on 2 on OSU. We have to thank Two Fellas Movers, MidFirst Bank, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, Oklahoma Ford Dealers, and FireLakeJobs.com. We also want to remind everybody to drive into your best in Oklahoma Ford Dealers today for the best deals on Ford's full lineup of trucks and SUVs. Ford is the best in Oklahoma. Sam, BYU game? That was crazy.
Yeah, you said it's funny. You mentioned maybe a lot of folks didn't think Oklahoma State would be there after the Iowa State game, after the South Alabama game, after the UCF game. I'm not so sure I thought Oklahoma State was going to be there in Arlington halfway through the BYU game last week. So the Cowboys come back against a team that they probably shouldn't have been down to again, but it's been a part of the Oklahoma State recipe a little bit all season. And they did it again one last time. I can't count them out against Texas. They're an underdog, and I think an underdog for a reason. But we'll get into all that. It has just been a wild ride, Ben. So I'm not ruling anything out from a wild season.
I don't know, Sam. There's something about this team. It just feels like deficits don't matter now. And I don't know why that is. At the start of this season, and Mike Gundy told us today at his press conference, week 3, week 4, we wouldn't have been able to come back from these kind of deficits. But sitting there in the press box at halftime against BYU, it didn't feel like the Cowboys were out of it completely. It felt kind of like, well, let's just see what kind of magic Gundy and the Cowboys have this week.
I agree. And maybe it was almost on BYU a little bit of never striking that complete death blow. And the Cowboys they weren't out of it quite yet. And then that first drive for both teams to start the second half, Cowboys, because BYU got the ball, so then you're thinking, okay, it could really get out of hand for the Cowboys here, but Oklahoma State defense forced a 3-and-out, and then the Cowboys went right down the field, and that's when you thought, okay, maybe the Cowboys kind of realize they're playing for another game. They're playing for a Big 12 championship. So it's been clicking in the second half lately. Like you said, Ben, last week, before the BYU game, the Cowboys had played one good half in their last 4 halves of football. And now, if you split that halfway, the Cowboys have kind of played 2 good halves in their last 6 halves of football, going back to the UCF game. But Oklahoma State, it's been enough. The Cowboys win the tiebreakers just barely, and now a team that is kind of just middle of the pack statistically in the Big 12, 8th in total defense, 8th in total offense, has made it to Arlington. It's been pretty crazy.
I think the only way a team can do that, Sam, can get to the Big 12 championship or beat the teams OSU has beaten this season with, as you said, middle of the pack offense and defense statistically in the Big 12, is by making enough winning plays. And that's something that the Cowboys have really done well this last week. I mean, I think back to Garrick Martin, the safety for the Cowboys, going after that onside kick. I think back to Alan Bowman making a play with his legs, scrambling, getting the ball to Brennan Presley. The Cowboys, it seemed like, made some winning plays against BYU.
Yeah, that Garrick Martin play, I don't even know. I certainly didn't catch it watching live, but I'd encourage maybe some fans to go back and watch that play. The onside kick, obviously Martin didn't get the ball, but what he did was he played that well. A lot of the guys on that side for Oklahoma State, they kind of leaned, took a step as that ball was being booted. Martin didn't. He held his ground, didn't kind of lean and take off early, and it paid because he immediately sprung after that onside kick and drew the flag. So that was a big play in a game full of big plays where you're focused, probably rightfully so, on Gordon's diving, game-winning touchdown and all that. There were a lot of under-the-radar plays that, again, has allowed this team 8th in both statistics on sides of the ball to win. I had the stat pulled up. I should say it for the folks at home. The Cowboys are averaging 30.2 points per game which is 8th in the Big 12, and then they're allowing 27.3 points per game. So I think Texas, Gundy said today, is at like 34 points scored per game and 17 allowed per game. So the Longhorns, they've averaged a lot less close games, and that's been evidenced. But it's interesting. I feel like, Ben, the roles are a little flipped. With last year, the Cowboys were kind of that Big 12 team vying for a one-loss season to have a reasonable shot at the playoff. And now Oklahoma State's
2 years ago.
2 years ago. Yeah. And now Oklahoma State's kind of playing the role of spoiler, where the Cowboys can be that Baylor. So little interesting there. But yeah, the Garrick Martin play was huge. What were the other ones you listed off, Ben?
I mean, I think of the one that got brought up today in the press conference, Jaden Nixon lowering the shoulder on 4th and 2. Mike Gundy said they've run that play several times this season, and nobody has played it as well defensively as the BYU corner on that play. Mm-hmm. But it was just Jaden Nixon. They were almost identical in size. Jaden Nixon gave up 5 pounds. 5 pounds separated those two guys, but Jaden Nixon lowered his shoulder, had the momentum behind him, and was able to convert, and that kept the eventual go-ahead drive alive. I thought that was a huge play.
Yeah, I tweeted that play out, and people were really liking that. I tweeted the video out. And I know a couple people said, "Oh, the corner, he needed to cut Nixon, needed to go down around the ankles." So maybe, I was trying to watch. I probably watched that play 30 times now, just seeing, and maybe that works. Maybe it doesn't, but yeah, that was a huge play on 4th and 2. Another play, Ben, that I think of, and I wrote about this a while back. Braden Cassidy had a block on Gordon's first overtime touchdown, where he took out 3 BYU. I think it was 2 linemen and the edge guy or 2 linebackers and the edge guy. And Cassidy, a fullback, he took out 3 guys to completely open up the backside, and Gordon had a cutback. So, heck, BYU scored first in overtime, got that touchdown, and the Cowboys are not in a good spot. But on the touchdown that Oklahoma State tied it back up on, that's a play that I look back on as, wow, that was a winning play that doesn't show up on the stats. And maybe that's why you're 8th and 8th. But those were the winning plays that Oklahoma State's made all season, that Cassidy made on that play, where great block. And it's been something the fullbacks have been, and the tight ends have been doing all year. I wrote about that. Nice. That was not a smooth plug, but go check that story out. I'll probably try to tweet that out too.
Well, and hey, how about Brendan Presley's tackle on the fake punt? I mean,
yes.
that field opened up, and BYU got that ball to a defensive lineman, Tyler Batty, like 6'6", 270 some pounds, and that's a mismatch on paper. But Brendan Presley somehow got him flipped. Tyler Batty went for the hurdle, which was interesting to see a guy that big go for the hurdle. Maybe he should have just tried to run straight through BP, and he would have had a little bit more success.
It kind of looked like that guy on a fast break in basketball, where he goes up for the massive poster and tries to create a highlight, but he gets the charge called on him. Because Brennan, he kind of just took a charge a little bit and brought Batty down with him. But Gundy mentioned that today in his Monday press conference. Brennan played both sides at Bixby, so he's a state champion defensive guy for the Spartans too. So I guess he harkened back to that a little bit. Yeah, that was a big play, no doubt. BYU only scored a field goal on that, right?
That's right.
Yeah, big play there.
So, I mean, those are the moments of just the BYU game where you look like, wow, like OSU can either go to Arlington or not, just based on this one game. But really, the season has had a lot of moments like that too, much bigger picture, Sam. I mean, I opened the show talking about how nobody would have thought after week 3 or week 4 that the Cowboys would be in this position that they're in now. And we listed a number of decisions from the coaching kind of standpoint, and also an in-game moment that we really felt like kind of changed the Cowboys season. Where do you want to start there?
Sure. The first one is obvious, but the reason we listed it and decided on it as a pivotal moment this season is because it wasn't obvious at the time. The Cowboys went with Alan Bowman. And at the time, the on-field quarterback battle at that point, they'd played 3 games, just come off the South Alabama game. And the Cowboys go to Ames, and Gordon gets all the snaps. all the playing time, or Bowman got all the playing time rather. Gordon kind of did too, but at that game that was September 23rd, and there wasn't a ton of separation. Bowman had been 30 of 52 for 253 yards and 1 touchdown up to that point, but the coaches had a vision, and it obviously paid off where they went with the experienced guy over Rangel and Gundy, and Oklahoma State lost that game. So that's worth mentioning too. Cowboys lost 34-27, but the offense looked functional at least. They decided to just go with Bowman, go with Gordon, and even though it didn't necessarily work out in that moment, like we said, the Cowboys lost. That was obviously the right move going forward.
I think that Iowa State game was the first time I can remember this season seeing the Cowboys with a true identity. And it was, they went to Ollie Gordon. He had that big run to kind of get that game started. And it wasn't perfect, right? The Cowboys lost, and the defense was struggling there in Ames. But the offense, it looked functional. It looked like it had an identity, and I really pinpoint that as the start of what the Cowboys run, like where that came out of. I think that's kind of the place it started was in Ames.
Yeah. And Bowman had 278 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks in that game. So not great, but not awful. But yeah, when now we write all the stories about Ollie Gordon, that's where you go back on his stat sheet and start counting up streaks of 100-yard games and all of that. And now Ollie Gordon now has finished the regular season with a nation high 1,580 rushing yards. And he has 2 games to go. So I imagine, unless something crazy happens, he'll finish the year as the nation's leading rusher. The number 2 guy is Cody Schrader from Mizzou, who's about 100 yards behind. So I think Ollie Gordon's right now a Doak Walker, certainly probably a finalist and probably the favorite right now. But like I said, it all started in Ames, and that was the first decision, Ben. The Cowboys found an identity in Ames.
And with that, kind of the decision made around that time was to simplify the running game. Once you see, hey, Ollie Gordon's going to be the guy who gives us the best chance to win, I think OSU at that point said, now how do we structure our offense around Ollie Gordon? And the solution to that was getting rid of the side-to-side stuff, getting rid of all the bells and whistles, and just handing the ball to Ollie Gordon downhill. And that really changed kind of the way, obviously, Ollie Gordon was successful. I mean, he had 18 carries against Iowa State, and he had 19 the first 3 games. So you can tell that's when they committed, and they just said, "Hey, we're gonna model our offense around Ollie's running style."
That's right, and then it's translated all the way to at least Thanksgiving week when we asked Gundy, hey, what are you most thankful for? And Gundy said, "Oh, probably when we figured out how to run block." And that's what it was. The Cowboys simplified. And then the byproduct of that was opening up holes for the nation's leading rusher. There just wasn't a ton of rushing room against Central Arkansas, against Arizona State, certainly not against South Alabama for those guys. So it has been night and day, kind of since that Iowa State game, which the Cowboys lost, but they found an identity there that has really carried this team. This team would wax the week 1 team that Oklahoma State trotted out. To me, it's not even a question. Which is you can say that pretty much about any team that they'd beat them, but this team, the way that it's improved and gone from, they did not look great against Central Arkansas or Arizona State, and obviously the South Alabama loss was big, but this team has really improved. Sometimes I've been a little. It's been questionable because you'd think this team's improved and then they go get beat so bad in Orlando. But by and large, the roller coaster it's been up. There's been hills and valleys to this, but it's been on a pretty steep ascent overall.
That's right. And I mean, what about that game in Houston? Sam, that was, I think, a real turning point where you mentioned Orlando. And Houston, the first half, kind of felt like Orlando again. Mike Gundy said if I looked up and I thought it was going to start raining because it just felt the exact same way until Trey Rucker came up with that pick 6. If you want to circle a singular play that kind of changed the definition of the season or changed the outlook of the season, that's got to be the one.
Yeah, I think that's fair because to contextualize, the Cowboys had come off a win against OU. That was obviously the high of all highs for that team. And then to get smashed in Orlando, that Houston game was big to just find out, is this Oklahoma State team going to give everything away? Is it going to crumble? And are all the big wins that the Cowboys got against the Kansas teams and West Virginia and all them, is that just going to mean nothing? And for a while, it looked like that, probably till the Trey Rucker interception. And his pick of Donovan Smith there turned that game around. Gundy said it was a huge culture win for the Cowboys. And I think that game made Oklahoma State's comeback against BYU at least a lot more believable, or in terms of, hey, they'd just done the same thing in Houston. And it was actually worse against BYU, the halftime deficit. And Rucker started a little before halftime in Houston, the comeback. But those two big comebacks, I think it started in Houston with that Rucker pick. You're right.
That's a really interesting point. I wonder if OSU can come back against BYU if they hadn't just done it at Houston. I mean, right? Like, if you've done it once, why not do it again?
I know.
Have that belief.
Rashad Owens, he already had the notes for his halftime speech. That's what everyone talked about. They said both weeks he did it. He might have just given the same verbatim speech as he did in Houston. It worked. So maybe he'll give it before the first half in Arlington. Who knows? But yeah, I don't know. I just thought that at halftime of BYU, the Cowboys didn't feel dead. And I think, at least to me in the press box, I don't know if you felt the same way. And a lot of that was because, hey, this team just came back from a pretty similar situation a week ago.
Yeah, it's 2 weeks in a row where the ESPN win percentage, that's a fun graphic to look at the end of a game, has been down near the 90%. Against Houston, it was 87%. And against BYU, it was like 91% in favor of the opposition. And yeah, like OSU was down 23-9 in Houston. Houston had the ball, going down to score before the half. Houston was getting the ball after the half. And then that interception changed everything. And like we said, if OSU doesn't come back against Houston, who knows what happens against BYU? It just kept the season alive. I think both of those plays were huge.
I'll tell you what, though, when you're a team like the Cowboys that have won a lot of close games, have come back, and you're pointing out individual plays that flip things, you have to sometimes take the hypothetical. And then the Cowboys, the win percentage in BYU was like 96% in the favor of the Cowboys. But then BYU went right down the field in the blink of an eye and kicked a dagger of a game-tying field goal. So just think about if overtime doesn't go the Cowboys' way, or point to any one of those plays. If Leon Johnson can't draw that flag, or Braden Cassidy, he misses on that block and Gordon's tackling the backfield, you just never know. But it's wild how different this podcast could be talking about. Of one play against BYU would make the headline of this podcast something like Cowboys season ends in a disgruntled mess in Stillwater against a BYU team that's not very good, and you just hand everything to OU. So it's crazy, really, with any football season, with any team, but especially the Cowboys. This ride over the last 3 years with this team has just been one of the crazier rides in college football.
Yeah, if OSU loses that game against BYU, we're talking about the drop from Corey Black that could have sealed the game, or the blocked PAT that would have put this one maybe out of reach, going up 4. And maybe that's what you have to do to get to the Big 12 championship if you're OSU. You just have to win the close games. We saw TCU do it last season. And look, maybe it evened out with the Horned Frogs this year. But to get to the Big 12 championship, to get to a huge game like the Cowboys have reached, and nobody's taking that away from them, you have to make those plays. And you have to win at a razor's edge, because as Mike Gundy tells us without fail every week, there's so much parity in the Big 12. And I'm starting to kind of see that a little bit.
Yeah, for a team that's gone 7-2 in the Big 12, that finished, again, 8th in total offense, 8th in total defense, it means you've won a lot of close games, and then maybe that gets balanced out by you got smacked a couple times. So the UCF game does no favors for the points allowed, points scored deal, and Oklahoma State's won a lot of close games to even that up. But yeah, That's it is this team is fascinating. And I think that's why I look forward to our next podcast in a couple of days when we talk about more in depth on the Texas matchup, because it's really hard to predict what that matchup's going to be. I can tell you what it looked like on paper. You'd think, oh, Texas is doubling up their opponents, and the Cowboys have not been doing that. But it'll be fascinating to look into that, where Texas's strength is his interior defensive lineman, one of its strengths. Texas has a few strengths, but we know the Cowboys' strength is pushing those interior D linemen out of the way, getting up and down, and letting Ollie Gordon run wild. So this will be a very interesting Big 12 championship game.
And we'll, I guess, get a tiny bit into that. We'll give you the sneak peek of our preview, Sam, with our 2-minute drill. It's going to be a fill-in-the-blank kind of question. Which OSU player needs to play well in order to beat Texas?
Center Joe Mikulski. And he actually left the game against BYU for a little bit. So that would have been a huge loss for the Cowboys. He's been really good this year for Oklahoma State. But he returned, played in overtime. Remember, in overtime, the Cowboys ran the ball a lot, gave it to Ollie Gordon, so relied on those big guys up front. And then Texas has 2 huge defensive linemen, 2 of the best guys in the country. I think Sark said today, I saw a quote, he hopes maybe one of them wins Big 12 Player of the Year and one of them wins Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. And that's reasonable. So Gundy said Texas always has guys like that, and we'll get more into that matchup. But man, Joe Mikulski, the center, who will be staring those 2 guys in the face all day on Saturday, he has his work cut out for him.
I'm going to go a little bit more chalk, Sam. I'm going to say Alan Bowman. Just because in 2021, Spencer Sanders threw 4 interceptions. That's almost uncomebackable. And the Cowboys still were able to come back on the strength of that vaunted defense. I don't think the Cowboys defense is going to be as tight this season in this championship game. I expect Quinn Ewers to get loose a little bit to make some passes and plays. So Alan Bowman's going to have to keep the ball out of the Longhorns' hands and not repeat a Spencer Sanders performance from 2021.
That's a good call. And Ben, another question I want to ask you. You were at the Oklahoma State, pop-up party tailgate scene last night, checking out the student village. What was the wildest thing you saw last night from we counted 140 tents from students lining up to claim tickets?
The wildest thing I saw was Ollie Gordon drop a pass. There was a student, Sam, who threw Ollie Gordon a pass. He had a paddle in his hand. He was doing interviews. And a student throws Ollie Gordon a pass, and Ollie dropped it. So maybe that's a bad sign for the Big 12 championship game, but I don't think so, because Ollie Gordon's not going to be running around in slides and no pads and 20-degree weather in AT&T Stadium. So it was a fun night out there hanging out with the students and stuff, and certainly you saw a little bit of everything out there. What'd you see?
The wildest thing I saw was probably the guys with a full DJ table set up. I'm not exactly sure how they even got electricity out just on under the kind of where the Gallagher-Iba entrance is under the overhang. But it was a couple guys from Beta, and they had a whole DJ set up, so they were entertaining the crowd until Ollie Gordon came in with the boombox over his shoulder, and then their music kind of got drowned out. But yeah, there were plenty of crazy sights and sounds from that pop-up party.
No doubt. Well, we're going to be back next week, of course, or later this week, I should say, to preview Texas and tell you all about what the Horns look like this year. It's going to be different from what you saw in Boone Pickens Stadium last season, so stay tuned for that. If you like anything that you hear, be sure to subscribe, hit us with a review, comments, anything. Maybe tell us what play you think defined or changed the Cowboys season this year, and we'll look forward to reading and responding there. As always, thanks to the folks who help us out behind the scenes here, Jacquelyn Musgrove, Michael Martin, Michael Lane, for all that they do for this show in selloutcrowd.com.